heroes often feel undefeatable. They always find a way to save the day, so when we lose them, especially if they are one of our favorites, it can leave us curled up in a ball, reeling. Spider-Man has met his end a few different times in the comics, but I still think one of the most heart-wrenching defeats for everyone's favorite neighborhood Spider-Man comes from outside of the main continuity actually, happening instead in the original continuity of Ultimate Comics. Here Spider-Man was defeated by the ultimate version of Green Goblin. The fight is a brutal one that sees Peter unmasked and forced to fight to save not just his neighborhood but also his loved ones, including Aunt May and MJ. In the end, he seemingly manages to take out Green Goblin, but at the extreme cost of his own life. Now, granted, as heartbreaking of a read as this is, we would of course later learn that both of these two survived, but that revelation wouldn't come until much later down the line, giving us a long time to mourn what felt like a devastating loss. The Death of Superman was a crossover story that was meant to shock readers and show them that the invincible and once undefeatable Superman they'd come to know over the years wasn't quite as unstoppable as they thought. Death of Superman was an event that began near the end of 1992 with the entire event and story spanning almost a full year in real time, ending in October of 1993. A pretty long time for a story when you consider its origin. Death of Superman actually started out as merely a passing joke. And no, I'm not joking about that. While brainstorming ideas for replacement stories for the story of Lois and Clark getting married, which DC Comics at the time had instead decided to postpone, Jerry Ordway suggested in jest that they should just kill him. Sales for the Superman series had actually recently begun to drop off, and so this joke quickly became the actual replacement plot for the wedding story, with DC hoping that it would remind readers of Superman's importance. And to be honest, it did. This one comes to us from an alternate reality, from a story known as Thanos Wins in issue number 17 of the 2016 Thanos series, with this arc in the series written by Donny Cates. Here we see the Fallen One, who is a now shiny onyx, formerly silver, surfer deemed worthy enough to wield Mjolnir. He fights against King Thanos, who has killed almost all life in the cosmos. The Fallen One attempts to make Thanos pay and initially has the upper hand in this fight, but in the end is beaten back, impaled, and torn asunder before being completely pulverized. Ugh. There was a point when I definitely saw this death running headlong at us, but I was hoping, like almost everyone, that we simply wouldn't have to confront it. In the MCU, Black Widow chose to sacrifice herself to recover the Soul Stone, which the Avengers needed to rebuild the Infinity Gauntlet, reverse the effects of the snap, and save, 50% of the universe, no big deal, including other fallen heroes, friends, and family. We knew someone would have to be sacrificed in order to get the Soul Stone, we knew it was coming, and yet somehow it still left me surprised. Especially when I realized, we're not getting Black Widow back, are we? That's it. That's the end. The utter defeat and loss of Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, was one of the most shocking things to read in comics, because of who was pulling the trigger here. At this point in comic book history, we might now know Maxwell Lord as a dangerous and more villainous figure, but at the time of Ted Kord's demise, Lord was believed to be an ally of the Justice League, not as someone that we would see betraying them. Blue Beetle had discovered that Lord had been against them the whole time, and was using his position to gather intel on superheroes and destroy the Justice League from the inside out. Maxwell still seemed to see Blue Beetle as a friend though, despite this, and he did offer him the chance to join him and protect the world against the superhuman threat, but Ted Kord refused and as such was eliminated by Lord. You think someone's your friend and then you find out they're a traitor and they shoot you. That's how it goes sometimes, especially in comics. While we knew that Wolverine's healing factor was beginning to fade due to a viral infection that was plaguing Logan, he was also one of Marvel's most popular characters, and honestly still is today. Wolverine, however, was such a big character at this point in 2014, after years of being one of the most iconic X-Men and tons of animated and live action films only adding to his popularity, that of course no one expected that Marvel would eliminate him. And yet in September of 2014, the death of Wolverine began, which saw Wolverine hunted down by his enemies thanks to a bounty that had been placed on his head by Viper. Although actually the founder of Weapon X, Dr. Abram Cornelius, had been behind this plot to capture Wolverine. During a fight with Cornelius, Wolverine finds himself covered in liquid adamantium, which hardens around him, and due to his healing factor being on the fritz, he suffocates and he dies. Don't worry though, like all things in comics, it would not be permanent. For this point, we're talking about Emperor Joker and the tragic and never-ending defeat of Batman at Emperor Joker's hands. Emperor Joker, for those that don't know, is an extremely powerful version of the Joker who came to be after Joker gets 99.99% of Mr. Mxyzptlk's power after tricking Mr. Mxyz out of it. Mr. Mxyz was going to give Joker actually 0.01% of his power, but instead was tricked by the Joker into giving him, well, the exact opposite percentage. The Joker then uses his newfound power to do a bunch of awful things, with one of the worst being, well, at least in Batman's case, to torment Batman on a daily basis before killing him at the end of every single day, only to resurrect him for the next, bringing Batman back so that Emperor Joker could then of course do it all again. This defeat was in fact so traumatic for Batman that eventually when Superman does find a way to beat the Joker and have the world restored back to normal, thank goodness, Superman is forced to take Batman's memories of this never-ending torment from Bruce's mind. Otherwise, Batman actually would not have been able to return to operating as a hero, as the experience left him thoroughly and completely broken. A lot of deaths in Ultimatum were startling, mostly because they were just so permanent, but also because a lot of them were honestly quite gruesome, this one included. You've been warned. Here we're focusing in on Janet Van Dyne's death during the Ultimatum massacre. This was probably one of the most shocking to have happened during Ultimatum, although there are quite a few others too in this grouping because of, how gruesome it is. Like I said, there's quite a few of them that were, but this is one of them. Here, Janet dies by being eaten by the Blob, and just FYI, it wasn't like she was small at the time and he just accidentally swallowed her or something like that. It wasn't at all that arbitrary or just easily dismissed in your mind. This was a gruesome, I'm gonna eat you while you are life-size kind of thing. Yeah, one of the reasons why Ultimates existed, of course, was to be kind of a darker, more shocking reflection to Marvel's usually more bright and optimistic version of itself, the 616 continuity, so I suppose it makes sense that some heroes' ends would indeed be, yes, this brutal. Remember that time Oliver Queen died because he didn't want to sacrifice his arm to live? Yep. That happened. In Green Arrow issues 99 to 101, we're taking on this roller coaster of a somewhat illogical ride that ultimately ends in Ollie's death. He has his hand on a dead man switch in a Russian explosive, and rather than let Superman deal with it, honestly, in any other way, because I feel like there's a lot of way you could have handled this problem, he simply just chooses to die. I don't think anyone would have expected that choice from Green Arrow. I know I didn't expect that choice. The strategy Superman comes up with is to remove Oliver's arm and fly him to safety, which, I kinda get because obviously Oliver's just a guy, he kinda needs his arm to be a hero, but it isn't that Ollie wants to risk that this plan won't work. He just doesn't want to sacrifice his arm because of this in order to live. So instead of coming up with a different way to deal with this, he kind of just dies. Gambit's recent demise in X-Men 97 episode 5 was a doozy for so many out there, and while in terms of him shuffling off this mortal coil, it was a defeat, in a way, his sacrifice was also a success. Gambit went out, himself ablazing, or a kinetically exploding, and managed to take out the Wild Sentinel that was threatening Genosha. Gambit not only gets Rogue out of harm's way in order to protect her and others at the gala, including Nightcrawler and even a bystander who seemingly resembles Bo DeMeo in the crowd, seriously look out for him, but he also takes on the Sentinel himself here. However, despite his sweet moves with his kinetic bow staff, this attack is cut short by a metal tentacle that flies out of the Sentinel to stop him in his tracks, impaling him. Yikes. However, because this tentacle is of course connected to the Sentinel itself and is in direct contact with Gambit internally, Gambit can supercharge the entire Sentinel in what appears to be an Omega level act. He blows it up, sacrificing himself to protect everyone else and giving up his life in the process, catching us all by surprise that Gambit could meet his end so soon in this series, only halfway through season 1. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I watched this clip a lot preparing for this video, and every time it still makes me cry, even though I know what's gonna happen. What's up with that? Number 10. Superman's new costume. Superman at one point had a new costume made for him. The costume was created for him by Lex Luthor, but Superman apparently didn't recognize his bald nemesis because he was in a disguise, i.e. he was wearing a wig. The other fail here on Superman's part comes from the fact that there was literally something built into the suit that he should have noticed. A giant ball of lead. Well, maybe not a giant ball of lead, but a sizable ball of lead. You'd think Superman would see that and immediately be suspicious, because although yes, he can't actually use his X-ray vision on lead, that makes it a lot more obvious that like, hey, that's lead. The lead actually contained kryptonite, Superman's weakness, and Luthor designed the suit so that he could trigger when the lead would be eroded away by acid to reveal the kryptonite, which would weaken Superman at the most opportune time. Also, Superman, this suit is just not very good. How did you not notice something was up with this? It literally has a giant green box across the chest that just reads in blocky letters Superman, and it's bright yellow with purple accents. Bruh. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like? Number 9. Big Barda is defeated by her own weapon. At one point, Big Barda is living on Earth and she has her purse stolen. The man who steals it takes chase, not realizing who he is just stolen from and that a powerful weapon, her Mega Rod, is in that purse. While escaping into the sewers, he runs into another being from Apocalypse, Sleaze. Sleaze takes the purse, and when Big Barda finally catches up, surprises her by knocking her out with her own weapon, because he knows how to use a Mega Rod. He later would use the Mega Rod to control Barda's mind and will, and even tried to force her and Superman to make a raunchy tape together using Barda's Mega Rod. Oh geez, Sleaze. Oof. Number 8. Wonder Woman is bound. One of the dumbest ways that Wonder Woman has been defeated actually correlates to one of her most classic and well-known weaknesses, being bound. In fact, traditionally, this only worked if she was bound by a man. Doing so would reduce her to becoming simply mortal, stripping away all her godlike powers and abilities. Although, to be fair, even a normal woman might be strong or skilled enough to actually escape these bonds. So you would think Wonder Woman might also be. And yes, I understand that this weakness also has symbolic significance for this character, but relative to the character and how powerful she normally is, it's still kinda dumb. Because it's like, yeah, you're powerful all the time, but if a man bounds you, that's it? You just lose it all? Wow. Harsh. Number 7. Hulk loves puppies. If you can believe it, at one point Hulk was actually defeated by his love of puppies. This was revealed to be a method that S.H.I.E.L.D. used to successfully calm Hulk down. Hulk has even stated in the comics before that his favorite animal is a dog, so I guess this makes sense in that regard, but that doesn't make it any less ridiculous. Hence why it's on this list. Number 6. Barbara Gordon forgets her training. This has always been a weird superhero defeat that has baffled me personally. So Barbara Gordon is Batgirl, right? And yet in The Killing Joke, which admittedly is a story that initially was intended to exist purely outside of canon and still sort of does, Barbara is accosted by the Joker pretty easily. Now granted, this was while Barbara was in her civilian form and was visiting her father, Jim Gordon, at his home. So she goes to answer the door and is surprised to see the Joker there, who shoots her in the stomach. I understand being surprised, and I understand not wanting to reveal your identity as Batgirl, but come on. This is Babs! I feel like she could have handily disarmed the Joker here with everything else I know about her and how skilled she is. Or at least she should have been able to, in my headcanon. Maybe I'm being unreasonable to assume this, but I really don't think so. Also, I feel like even if you're like, oh, I gotta protect my secret identity by doing nothing, you can still do something. I mean, you are Jim Gordon's daughter, so I feel like people would assume you have some kind of combat training. Number 5. Jean's planetary-sized stroke. Sometimes I think about some of the things happening in the Krakoa era, and when I remember all the history of these characters, it blows my mind. Like when, for example, during Grant Morrison's new X-Men run in issue 150, Magneto was revealed to be Zorn. Although thankfully we'd actually get an entirely different Zorn later on, and Magneto here used an electromagnetic pulse to give Jean Grey, who at the time had the power of the Phoenix Force, a quote planetary scale stroke. End quote. What that means, I still don't really know. What is that? This all went down at a moment too when Jean was actually winning the fight, but was used as a method for Magneto to basically turn the tables on her. Jean would end up dying in this battle, even though the idea of beating the Phoenix in this way just seems, I mean, pretty ridiculous to me. I mean, this is the Phoenix we're talking about, who can control, manipulate, and even create matter at an atomic level. Who also prior to this was stabbed through by Wolverine, which she not only survived, but this actually unleashed her power, her latent Phoenix abilities. And yet somehow, after all that, she ends up killed by a stroke. Well, I mean, I guess it's not any stroke. It is a planetary scale one, but still. Also, what does that even mean? It's so comics. And now it's really weird to think that like Jean and Magneto like were friendly up until his death. That's pretty crazy. Number 4. Batwoman goes out with a whimper. For this point, we are not talking about Kate Kane, Batman's cousin and the current Batwoman over at DC Comics. We're talking instead about the first Batwoman, Kathy Kane. Although she does sound like she would be the same person based on, well, I mean, both of her names. This version of the character, however, was actually not related to Batman and was even a bit of a love interest for him, as well as a female crime-fighting partner. However, apparently neither her skills nor her connection and long-standing relationship with the Caped Crusader would protect her from getting unceremoniously fridged. Long before the term was ever coined, I believe, in issue number 485, more than 250 issues after her first appearance, she was killed, get this, off-panel, when Batman was knocked out. The League of Assassins had come for Kathy and Batman was unable to stop them. While he was knocked unconscious, she was killed, and of course we don't get to see any of that because he was knocked out and we're following his narrative, not hers. So with her death really only served as well to give Batman motivation to go after the League of Assassins, so there's also that point. Very unfortunate. Number 3. Green Lantern sees yellow. Yep, what a ridiculous way to defeat Green Lantern, but this was the approach that was taken in Frank Miller's Batverse. In All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder issue number 9, Batman is confronted by Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. In this reality, Batman is not yet part of the Justice League, and Green Lantern doesn't like the way that Batman is operating. He's one of the people who is kind of more against offering Batman a place on the team, but he did think he could be redeemed. After all, Batman is still a hero, but it's his methods that Hal and many of the other team members take issue with, which is why Hal came to talk to him about that. However, this talk did not go so well. Green Lantern meets Batman and Robin in one of Batman's safe houses, which has all been completely painted yellow, right down to Batman and Robin's face and suits. Robin even eats yellow ice cream while Batman drinks yellow lemonade. It's like overkill. Obviously this is done to mock Hal's weakness to the color and probably to actually weaken him, to be honest. Not only does Batman claim the moral high ground in their debate, but Robin actually manages to steal Green Lantern's ring in this issue, and then he, not Batman, is the one who proceeds to defeat him in a fistfight, even almost killing him, with Batman being forced to take aggressive action to save Hal's life. Also, could you imagine like being in the ambulance that comes to this emergency call? You like come into this safe house, everything's yellow everywhere, like that would be so weird. Oh boy. Number 2. Batman kicks the Hulk and lives. In DC Special Series issue number 27 from 1981, we get a strange mashup of Batman and the Hulk. Like many superhero team-ups, especially involving crossovers between publishers, these two end up initially forced to fight one another, with the Hulk being led to believe that Batman is his enemy, having been manipulated by the Joker. And I think we all know how we'd imagine this fight would go. I mean, Hulk versus Batman, you would think the Hulk's definitely gonna win that fight. Batman is extremely skilled, but he is just a man. During their first fight, Batman desperately attempts to defeat the Hulk by using sleeping gas. However, Hulk understands that the gas is dangerous and decides to hold his breath. Batman surmises that he needs to find a way to make the Hulk breathe, because the Hulk could probably hold his breath forever, since his lungs are so big. First of all, Batman, I don't think that's the way lungs work. Just because the Hulk has a larger lung capacity doesn't mean he could hold his breath for longer, I don't think. His body is simply larger, which is why his lungs are bigger, and lung size doesn't necessarily correlate to being skilled at holding one's breath, at least not as far as I know. In fact, the Hulk being large would likely just mean that his body requires more oxygen, hence his larger lungs. Secondly, Batman kicks Hulk in the stomach to force him to breathe, which somehow works. Which is insane, considering that Batman is just a normal man with amazing skills. In other words, how did he succeed and also not shatter his leg in his attempt to do so? I mean, a kick from Batman to Hulk has to feel like nothing. And also, if Batman kicked the Hulk with enough force to do that, you would think he would mess himself up really bad. Number 1. Dollar Bill's cape. A lot of people say that capes are dumb. It's not just Edna Mode saying that. And if you were able to ask the Dollar Bill, I'm sure he'd actually agree with them. But you can't, because 1, he's a fictional character, and 2, he's dead. Dollar Bill is a minor character from Watchmen. He was a member of the Minutemen in the 1940s. While attempting to stop an armed bank robbery, his cape was caught in a revolving door and he was shot and killed. So, No capes! Number 10. Daredevil vs. Kingpin. Issue 227 of Daredevil, called Apocalypse, is a significant event in the Born Again story. It is considered one of the most devastating defeats that Daredevil has ever faced. In this issue, Kingpin discovers Daredevil's true identity and uses it to basically destroy his entire life. Kingpin's actions here are not limited to just killing Daredevil. He turns it up to like 11. Instead, he decides to take a more sinister and personal route. Kingpin starts by destroying Matt's law practice, making it seem like he bribed a witness. But that's not all. Kingpin goes on to ruin his finances, his sanity, and even blows up Daredevil's apartment, destroying his costume in the process. This defeat is a turning point for Daredevil, and it leaves him feeling helpless and defeated. However, he does realize that he now knows who is responsible for his suffering. It is none other than the powerful Kingpin. Despite his despair, Daredevil's determination and resilience are stronger than ever as a result. He is ready to fight back and finally take down the Kingpin once and for all. Sometimes you gotta lose everything to beat the baddest guy there is. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not check out our Brutal Comic Moments playlist. Number 9. Superboy Prime vs. The Darkest Knight. This particular fight scene is quite heart-wrenching, honestly. It takes place in the comic book Dark Knight's Death Metal: The Secret Origins. Although the fight itself is brief, it has significant emotional and character development implications. Superboy Prime faces off against the Darkest Knight with the hope of defeating him and saving the multiverse. While he doesn't entirely succeed here, he does turn the tides in favor of his fellow heroes. This story provides an excellent redemption arc for Superboy Prime, who was once a hero but turned into a massive villain due to the heartache of losing his world. During the fight, the Darkest Knight offers to spare Superboy Prime and even invites him to join his army of Supermen. Superboy Prime sees a vision of the life he could have in the future, where he is once again a hero fighting alongside his colleagues. However, he realizes that this would not be the world he lost, as both his parents and Lori would still be absent. Despite the temptation, Superboy Prime ultimately chooses to fight against the Darkest Knight and gives his life in doing so. This is a crucial moment in the story where the tides actually turn for our heroes, weakening the darkness and allowing them to rise up. It is later confirmed that Superboy Prime did indeed die as a result of fighting back, but while he lost the battle, at least the heroes were able to then win the war, thanks in part to his sacrifice. And Superboy Prime either gets his world back through his journey into the afterlife, or possibly through the multiverse's reconstruction following the resolution of Death Metal. Number 8. Black Panther vs. Moon Knight. In the Avengers Age of Khonshu story arc, Moon Knight confronted a majority of the Avengers. During this confrontation, he faced Black Panther directly in Wakanda with his army of Khonshu worshippers. Moon Knight's presence was so intimidating that Black Panther actually just chose to surrender instead of fighting him. It should be noted that this was likely a strategic decision on Black Panther's part. However, the fact remains that Moon Knight managed to get what he wanted, a voluntary surrender from Black Panther without even actually having to come to blows. A whole other kind of brutal, really, when you think about it. Especially when you consider that in the next issue, T'Challa was imprisoned, tormented, and basically forced to submit to the power of Khonshu. Number 7. Batman vs. Reverse Flash. This fight was emotionally distressing for numerous reasons, and it represents the exact type of fights I want to highlight on a list like this. In the 2016 comic Batman issue number 21, which is part of the Button story, Batman is compelled to fight against an adversary who completely outclasses him, the Reverse Flash. He is brutally attacked, and even though it appears that Batman is doomed to lose here, we later discovered that he had already kind of won by accepting the fact that a direct fight would result in his defeat. Knowing that his best strategy would be to stall until Barry Allen's The Flash returned, he was able to succeed and save his life despite, well, kinda losing the fight. It was a strategic loss, but he still gets pretty badly beaten. Number 6. Deadpool vs. Moon Knight. In issue number 8 of Vengeance of the Moon Knight, Deadpool and Moon Knight face off against each other. Although Deadpool is known for being a brutal vigilante and anti-hero with superior healing abilities, it is Moon Knight who actually emerges victorious here. The fight between the two characters highlights their similarities and their differences, as they both use pretty violent methods and both have their own inner voices to contend with, and are often both misunderstood characters and heroes. However, despite these similarities, Moon Knight manages to make Deadpool admit defeat and surrender by using his sword, with Deadpool finally saying, "Uncle." And you know Deadpool doesn't go down easy, so if he's saying uncle, I'll just let you imagine what happens. They don't really show us but it's the fact that they don't show us that like traumatizes me. Number 5, Jason Todd versus Joker. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it does me. The famous line spoken by Joker before he brutally attacks Jason Todd with a crowbar. This all went down in the Batman story A Death in the Family. Fans at the time were able to vote on whether or not Jason Todd would actually live or die in this story, and after the brutal attack on his life in issue 427 that ends with an explosion going off which buries his body in rubble, in issue 428 we'd get our answer to that question, and Jason would indeed end up seemingly dead. Number 4, Ghost Rider versus Carnage. During the Absolute Carnage event, Carnage had a field day. He defeated both heroes and villains with seeming ease. Anyone who had ever been in contact with the symbiote in the past was basically a target in this event. Carnage's ultimate goal was to collect all the codices from the spines of those who had ever been bonded to a symbiote. Yeah, you heard that right. From the spines. The list included Alejandra Jones, who was a spirit of vengeance, also known, of course, as Ghost Rider. By the time Carnage arrived at her doorstep, Alejandra had already expended much of her power while defending her village. Unfortunately, Carnage managed to overpower her and take her life. Really sucks because I actually really liked Alejandra. Alejandra was sent to hell, but she was able to return and get her final vengeance on Carnage while also protecting her village. So although she lost her life, at least she gotta protect the village, you know? Number 3, Invincible versus Conquest. I recently got caught up with the first part of the second season of Invincible, and just as before when I watched it, I was blown away by the numerous, intense, and captivating fights and storytelling in this show. This show and comic series does an excellent job of creating both physical and emotional stakes for its characters. While I could talk about any of the memorable fights in the comic series, I want to give a special shout out to the fight between Invincible and Conquest. When Conquest arrives on Earth and demands that Invincible take responsibility as the Viltrumite liaison, Mark is already dealing with a lot of emotional baggage, let's say. Despite this, he decides to take on Conquest in a fit of anger and resentment, only to learn the hard way just how powerful his opponent is. The fight becomes even more intense when Adam Eve enters the fray, having flown herself out of a hospital bed just to help Mark. Number 2, Venom versus Carnage. At the end of the Absolute Carnage event, Cletus Cassidy as Carnage gave Eddie Brock a choice between saving the world or saving his son. It wasn't a simple choice, but rather a choice between saving his son and basically letting the world fall victim to Null, or not saving his son, and well, the world would probably fall victim to Null anyway, but he wouldn't be the one who was more responsible for this happening. In the end, Eddie chose to save Dylan, which ultimately led, of course, to the awakening and return of Null. Although, like I said, it was a tough choice because either way that was probably gonna happen. This was a brutal defeat to read because either way, Eddie would have really lost and Carnage would win, even if Carnage didn't survive. And even still, somehow, Carnage did end up surviving this, because Carnage is still around now. Number 1, Invincible versus Omni-Man. One of the most memorable and memeable lines from this superhero defeat, and the Invincible animated series overall, I would say, is "Think, Mark." However, there is a more brutal line than that said by Omni-Man during this fight. One spoken when he suggests that he could actually kill Mark with his own hands and make another child, asking, "What's 17 more years?" As a Viltrumite, Omni-Man's lifespan is much longer than a human, so 17 years is a brief span of time to him, relatively. This reduces the emotional connection he has built up with his son to something seemingly meaningless. Especially heartbreaking for us who've been watching that bond build, and then you say that, you're like, oh, it's honestly heartbreaking to watch, making the beating that Mark takes even more brutal. Nevertheless, we know that for Omni-Man, who honestly does love his son, it is not that simple. Ultimately, while he wins the fight, he is unable to deliver the killing blow.